Hello. Thank you to Jessica for that overview of the FTC and the Office of Technology. It should make this a little bit more clear. I'm Simon. I joined the Federal Trade Commission almost a year ago after working as a systems administrator, site reliability engineer, and programmer for a number of years. And then at my last job, I was doing that sort of work at The Markup, which is a nonprofit investigative news outlet focusing on technology. And I also sort of pretended to be a journalist at points and did investigations into sensitive online tracking technology on sensitive websites. I'm going to be talking about privacy-enhancing technologies and sort of one of the ways that we're thinking about these at the FTC, and specifically how there's sort of this spectrum of privacy-enhancing technologies from very dependent on the policies of the organization, and maybe the technology adds a little bit on top of it, to sort of very dependent on the technology, and maybe the policy adds a little bit on top. It's based on a blog post we published in February called Keeping Your Privacy-Enhancing Technology Practices or Promises, and you can look that up if you're interested. As with Jessica, the views expressed in this presentation may not necessarily represent those of the Commission or any individual commissioner. I am also not a lawyer. I rarely even pretend to be one. I'm going to move on before Jessica objects to that statement. I was going to make all my slide headings references to the Ramones Pet Cemetery. Turns out there's actually not a lot to work with there, and they're not super applicable, but there are some references scattered throughout. So why am I talking about pets? So as Jessica mentioned, the FTC cares about protecting consumer privacy and consumer information, and pets can be an important tool for service providers to prevent not only intentional misuse of data, but also accidental or negligent misuses stemming from hacks, bugs, or misunderstandings of internal policies, however convenient those misunderstandings may be. And we're seeing a number of sort of high-profile rollouts of pets these days, especially as it relates to the deprecation of third-party cookies in major browsers and mobile operating systems that are adding more transparency and control requirements. But as I said, sort of pets exist on a spectrum. On one end, a company has access to sort of all of an individual user's data and relies on sort of policies and procedures to make sure that they're not misused, and sort of the technology plays a little bit into that. On the other end of the spectrum, the organization has access to very little or no, ideally sort of no data, and it's much less reliant on those policies in order to offer these services in a private way. And then pets are going to fall into various places along the spectrum. I think that's a little bit abstract, so to give some concrete examples, I'm using sort of very wide definition of pets here. But most role-based access controls and most hashing of PII are going to fall into the sort of very policy-dependent aspect of pets. They may prevent some individuals or all individuals associated with a developer from accessing data, but if the organization, say for the role-based access control, suddenly says, you know what, everybody is now a super user and a database admin and can get access to anything they want, there's nothing really stopping the company from doing that. Similarly, for hashing of PII, if you just sort of look in the database, that might be meaningless. But if you decide, all right, we're going to hash every username or every name in the phone book, every phone number, every email address, you're going to end up sort of that's no longer that strong of a control. And so the user is really trusting the developer to keep these in place, and there's not sort of as much to keep that in check. And then sort of thinking about the other end of the spectrum, you have end-to-end encryption, sort of assuming a robust implementation, key exchange protocol, metadata protection, or client-side differential privacy, assuming robust implementation and a low enough epsilon. Where sort of ideally, even the developer of the product itself can't go in and see all of this individual user data. If they suddenly turned evil and wanted to know all the information about all of the users, short of pushing some sort of code change to the client, that's not something they're going to be able to do, and hopefully even that is sort of detectable. And then some pets sort of will fall more to the middle of the spectrum. If you can use pets that are super dependent on the technology side. That's really great. But there are probably going to be some use cases, some functionality, some things that users want, where there aren't things available at the time, or maybe even not possible to be available, that are on the fully private end of the spectrum. And so there are also ones that are falling in the middle of the spectrum that sort of lessen the need for trust in one individual organization without sort of removing that trust completely. To give an example of this, multi-party computation. I'm not going to go too deep into the weeds of this because I think the audience has a fairly good idea of this. But most relevant for this, I'm thinking of how it could be used for like user analytics, where you're sending derivations of data up to, where let's say a developer wants to know information about how users are using the service, what they're doing on it in order to make some product decisions. They could have all of that data sent up directly to them, but like maybe they don't want such specific information about individual users. Splitting that up between a couple different entities in a way that's not meaningful to either entity, but they can do some sort of computation together to get aggregate statistics can be a more privacy-preserving way of doing that, but sort of rests on this assumption that these organizations are following their own privacy or own policies and aren't sharing the data together and combining it in a way that allows them to look at data for individual users. So you sort of have to trust that that two organizations won't sort of work together to be evil instead of just one, and it's an improvement, but it's not on the all the way private end of the spectrum. Similarly, oblivious proxies or relays. If a developer wants to get information from users or respond to users with information without necessarily knowing what user is asking for this can be a way to do this, where the developer creates a public key for themselves, and the user encrypts the data to that public key, but instead of sending it directly to them, sends it to some middle entity who removes any sort of identifying metadata, like an IP address, and forwards it along to the developer. Again, you're in the situation where it's great, like that these two entities neither one of them has alone the ability to see sort of which individual user is sending information, but you are in the situation where these companies need to maintain their sort of adherence to their policies and not sort of work together to de-anonymize all this. Great. So how can companies avoid ending up in the pet cemetery? Multi-party computation and oblivious proxies are great, but one major downside they have is that they're much harder for independent third parties to audit or the users themselves to audit. So I can't necessarily go in and see what's actually happening inside the company of an app that I'm using, and so I might not know, like, are they actually like these other parties that they're supposedly sort of independent from and not sharing data with. It's hard to tell exactly what's happening there. And sort of for everything, but especially for things that are more sort of on the policy side of the spectrum, companies still need to keep Section 5, which is the part of the FTC Act Jessica mentioned that covers unfair or deceptive practices. Companies still need to keep this in mind and make sure that they're not engaging in any of these unfair or deceptive practices as it relates to these privacy-enhancing technologies. And the FTC has brought cases against companies that claimed specific technology-based privacy or security guarantees that they then allegedly failed to live up to. So in 2016, the FTC settled with the dental practice software provider Henry Schein for their promotion of the use of encryption software in their product, when it then turned out that they were using encryption software with significantly less security than industry standards. And so like if a company is saying we're using encryption in our app, there's sort of this assumption that it's a meaningful, strong encryption that sort of matches what the rest of the industry is doing instead of something sort of home-rolled that isn't actually that secure. In 2020, Zoom settled with the FTC over their promotion of Zoom as end-to-end encrypted. It turns out that it was encrypted, but not end-to-end. It was only between the client and the server. And Cafe Press settled with the FTC in 2020 over their claim to encrypt customers' sensitive personal information when it turned out they were not doing that. And sort of in summary, it's encouraging to see the continued development of technologies that allow the delivery of useful products and services to consumers without while maintaining their privacy. And the FTC and myself personally will continue to follow these developments in the space. But false or misleading representations with regard to privacy and security by companies, whether implicitly or explicitly, or by inclusion or by omission, may be a violation of the law. I think I went a little bit fast and a little bit early, but I think that's OK. I think that Jessica is going to come back on stage, and we can take questions. Also, a thing that I forgot to note, just going back to, if someone has like the correct name for this, I've been trying to figure out what the name is for sort of this class of technology. Like there are some implementations of it, but I couldn't figure out what the sort of general terminology for it. It might just be oblivious proxies or oblivious relays, but I'd be interested. So yeah, questions. Also, feel free to come up to Jessica or I guess, during the conference. Ask us questions, yell at us for things we're doing wrong.
Yes.